How do you, let's say, mount a defense against an enemy that you don't even know is there? Because, of course, not just social media, but all the rest of these just horrific things that are happening around us. Again, we've called it MK Ultra for the masses. We've called it psychological warfare. But there's an actual term for this, by the way. It's called fifth generation warfare. And what it means is non-kinetic warfare, meaning that they're waging war on people. Okay. And they're doing it without that kinetic weaponry of old, meaning guns, meaning, tanks and bombs and all those things, which are, again, horrific. And I'm not saying we should go back to bombing each other. I mean, it's still happening, but I'm not saying it should be prevalent. We shouldn't be bombing anybody. Okay, but I think therein lies the problem. When bombs are dropping, it's, let's say, especially if they're not dropping in your neighborhood, it's a little easier to cheer on, get the bad guys. But if they're dropping in your neighborhood, suddenly you don't really feel like the bad guy. You get it? You could two ways to look at this, as always. But then beyond that, imagine if there's no bombs dropping at all. Let's all pray for a world like that, by the way. Whether you pray or not, good frequencies, vibrations, all that stuff, prayers or not, it all fits. It does, like I always say, good thoughts do not hurt in this realm of fifth generational warfare. But here, the next step is, instead of kinetic damage, instead of actually guns and bombs and tanks, as I said, what's happening is they're using ourselves against us, our own human nature. They're using all of this stuff as the media, the governments of the world, and even non-state actors. Notice too, and I don't want to get too, let's say, political in terms of, pointing out, because look, and this is why, because the second you get political, it gets divisive. The second it gets divisive, people start breaking down and kind of going to, reverting to their most core beliefs and biases, which we all have, we really do. And then all communication breaks down about a particular thing. So I'm going to just point out real quick to start, and I'm going to back off it, and I'm not going to talk about these things, but just examples. Keep these in your head as examples of what's happening right now. Okay. Again, we got the Ukraine thing going. We got the Israel thing going. There's a lot happening in the world right now. Sort of the impending Taiwan invasion that everybody keeps talking about. There's a lot of that stuff. And I've got some theories on what's actually going down, but I'll save that for another time, I think. But basically it's this. The scary part about all of this is that the part that troubles my mind is if we actually see or sense, or let's say, no, we have an enemy that's working very hard against us, except we don't know who the enemy is. How do we combat this enemy? Or how do we, let's say, not even fight? Let's say, how do we defend ourselves? Becomes exactly the paramount question here in terms of what this is. And look, there's a couple recent examples I can talk about in terms of, let's say, bring it out of the geopolitical world and just talk about it domestically. I think specifically, I think the UFO type stuff, I think there's a bunch of actual psyop stuff happening there. I think that we're supposed to be distracted by the shiny object, the extraterrestrials. And I'm not saying ETs aren't real and the rest of that, of course, the big universe and all that. I definitely think there's life out there. But is it sort of based on the narratives of 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 people? That seems like a very tight-knit crew and very, let's say, controllable in terms of an information flow. So, for instance, remember when we had what was it? Well, recently you can say David Grush, and not to say that I don't trust David Grush as the whistleblower, but look at all the information that's kind of swirling around that whole bit. He was a whistleblower. It came out recently talking about these reverse engineering things and, all the rest of the UFO stuff. But think about recently, beyond UFOs. Do you remember, though, and I've talked about this in the past as well, when it happened and a little bit later after, sort of this shook out and they came to a conclusion. But you remember all those drone sightings in Colorado when, they dispatched the police and it was all the buzz. People were talking about it. It was getting headlines. And then, of course, then they just went away. And basically the cops wrote it off as mass hysteria, nothing to see here, right? And so the question becomes, do we trust what we see with our own eyes? Do we trust what we hear with our own ears? And it's becoming more and more difficult in a world where things are not as easily defined in terms of deep fakes and this type of thing. And specifically, somebody like me, somebody like you, whoever's out there, when you can fake things that, maybe you have a cursory trust in people and they start saying horrific things. But beyond that, so we got the Colorado thing and just a couple of recent examples that come to mind of maybe some of these things in play. And